thank you again. I'm going to talk about artificial intelligence and that in pharma, and specifically a focus on clinical trials. So what's happening there, and I'm going to give a more broad overview of the things that we see happening in that landscape, the kind of technologies being used, what is being implemented, what is being worked on. And before starting that, I wanted to give you a small introduction about myself. For disclosure, I'm actively engaged with some of the companies that I mentioned during my presentation, just so you know. For me, I'm from the Netherlands originally, background in biotechnology and molecular biology, then did a postdoc in neuroscience at Harvard Medical School for several years, and then moved into industry and worked for a variety of companies over the last 10 plus years. The last position was at Takeda Pharmaceuticals. I left Takeda early this year, started my own company, BioFrontline, and I'm now helping the pharmaceutical industry as well as small and mid-sized companies to connect with each other and to really bring innovation and novel platforms, novel technologies to the pharmaceutical industry. And it's across the board, but obviously clinical trials are very important for pharma. And so a lot of these technologies are also related to anything that's related to running clinical trials. I'm also having several LinkedIn groups that might be of interest for you. You see them here listed, and you're of course welcome to join. So about the presentation, part one of the presentation is about more the patient's perspective on AI in clinical trials. And I'm also talking a little bit about the impact of COVID-19 on especially cancer clinical trials, but that's very representative of the impact on clinical trials across the board. And then in part two, I will really talk about how AI, artificial intelligence, machine learning and such will transform clinical trials, how artificial intelligence is really implemented across the pharma value chain, some of the challenges of the use of artificial intelligence, and probably for many of you, nothing of this comes as new, but I thought it would be good to mention. And then I'll end with a quick look at what's there in the future, beyond the horizon, what can we expect, and what's in the pipeline of AI in the healthcare and pharma sector. So to begin with the patient's perspective, obviously a lot of what we do is crucial for patients, and although that's the case, many times I speak with people and organizations that are working very hard on a multitude of things. And not to say that I forget the patient, obviously the patient is always on their mind, but the patient's perspective is sometimes a little bit forgotten. And I just wanted to share with you a story about a good friend of mine, Karen Lee Sobel. She was diagnosed with Waldenström's macroglobulinemia in 2005 and had to go through a clinical trial. She did very well, came out of that cured, and she is still very well today, luckily, and she is currently a celebrated artist in the Boston area. And that's why you see some of her paintings on the lower part of this slide. I asked her, well, what would you think of AI in clinical trials? What's your perspective on that? How could this have helped you, and what are your ideas on that? Saying there are several things. She also wrote a book I want to mention, and you see it here on the left side of the slide, 12 Weeks. And for anybody involved in clinical trials, or anybody who would like to have a better insight into what clinical trials are about and what this does with the patient and their families, I can highly recommend to read it, because it's really giving an insight from her personal way of dealing with this and going through a clinical trial and what that means. I asked her about I would have been there. And she said one of the things, it might have been helpful to find specialists. And I think we can see today that several companies are really working on that to provide that kind of insight. Well, where do you find the specific patient, the specific doctor, the specific clinical trial that is useful for you? AI might also have assisted on giving advice for the best course. That's of course a thing that, quite some companies are working on that as well. Giving advice to the doctors, really help to manage the clinical trial, make decisions during the clinical trial, what best way of action. And so that's an area that is also quickly developing today. What she was also saying, and I found this very interesting, that AI might also have provided too much information. In her case, she would have expected, if she would have asked AI whether or not to take the effort to enroll in a clinical trial, AI, with all the statistics and everything, might just have told her to give up, because the chances of her to survive that clinical trial were, very close to zero, I would say. And I think that's something we need to keep in mind also when we use AI and we provide, especially patients, with information. How much information do we provide to the patients, and in what kind of form do we provide information to the patients? You see many technologies like doctors, apps on the phones that are being used by patients without healthcare providers being involved. And there is, of course, a danger that patients get very worried, draw the wrong conclusions. And I think that's something we need to be very careful about. What she was also saying was that AI is not a substitute for human interaction. And I think we can all agree on that, although they have come very far in artificial intelligence and virtual assistants and such. There is, of course, always the aspect of human face and empathy and all those kind of things that AI cannot replace yet. And I think that's also very important to keep in mind. Another thing that is interesting also in that respect, AI still can alarm patients, because a lot of people, when hearing AI, they think of the Hollywood movies, and they really think of AI as being robots at the bedside in the hospital. And I think that's, of course, a misconception by many people, but we need to do something to set it straight, educate the people. And I think that that can be done by showing that AI will really help people from becoming patients. And also when we show that AI can really help patients to become better, faster, and quicker leave the hospital, obviously we have a strong message to tell the patients and to tell the public that AI is really there to help and nothing to be afraid of. And about the impact of COVID-19 on clinical trials at the moment, and this is a paper of Nature Reviews, Drug Discovery, volume 19 of this month. And it shows the effect of COVID-19 on cancer clinical trials. And what you really see that enrollment has been affected quite largely, especially in the US and in Europe. You see that more than 80% of the clinical trials are negatively affected. In Asia, a little bit less so, but also there you see that there's a huge impact on clinical trials. And this has to do with the fact that patient care cannot be provided because from a distance that's quite difficult. And also administration routes like injectors, for example, where people really need to go to the hospital and need a healthcare provider to provide these kind of therapies, make it very difficult to do that in a situation of really visit the patients or have the patients visit the healthcare facility. So for that reason, investigators are adopting or planning to adopt technologies that can reduce on-site monitoring and in-person patient visits. And you see a huge uptake, if that was not already there before the COVID-19, now after COVID-19, telemedicine, remote electronic medical records, access for monitors, virtual monitoring, all those things really get a huge push by the COVID-19 crisis. And you can read all of that yourself in one of the latest Nature Reviews. This also coincides with a much larger patient acceptance and adoption of digital health and artificial intelligence and all the gadgets and wearables that go with that. You see there's really an uptake of health bands, smartwatches, patches, sensors, ingestibles, and with all their apps. And so there's a huge sector and absolutely crucial also to really benefit from all the things that are going on in the development in the artificial intelligence world. And I can also recommend here that there's a very nice, little bit dated maybe, but early 2019, also in Nature Biotechnology, about wearable biosensors for healthcare monitoring. And because I saw that the internet connection is a little bit unstable. John, can you still hear me?
Yes, I hear you.
Loud and clear, Ronald.
Okay, then I continue. Second part, really how AI is going to affect clinical trials especially. And Stacey already mentioned it becomes something of very much importance. And you see that we were not able to collect before. And because of this, also there will be novel methods developed to analyze all these kind of data. And this will really form the foundation, a new foundation of personalized and precision medicine that we could not have dreamed about, say, 20 years ago. So from to prevent people from becoming a patient. And that's, that's really a result of all the new technologies that are being developed today. Monitoring patients, diagnosis, that's of course a big industry, and we see in image analysis, voice analysis, keystroke analysis, EEG, and so on. A lot of technologies and companies working in those sectors really I want to mention quickly two. Tokyo some years ago had a patient that was had a condition, and they knew that it was a form of leukemia, but could not find out what exactly it was. They involved IBM Watson because they were not able to tell what it was. And less than 10 minutes went through 20 million research papers, and not only came with the correct diagnosis, but also came with immediately the therapy that this person needed to follow, the best course of action. And that only in 10 minutes. And I mean, that's really still in its infancy, but I see in the future that doctors will just, add the data to a computer and ask the computer, and within a couple of seconds, several diagnoses roll out of it. And so it will be a huge assistant to help medical specialists to quickly find out what is wrong with somebody, and then also give the right correction or the right therapy to follow. Another example is Google DeepMind that worked together with the Moorfield Eye Hospital. Moorfield Eye Hospital provided Google DeepMind with over 1 million optical copies, and these were used to train degeneration and sight loss. Just recently, on May 18th, DeepMind claimed that it can predict macular degeneration now more accurately than any of the experts in the world. So that's really amazing. That's really more fields where AI, especially in the image technology field, where AI becomes better than the experts in identifying very early signs of certain conditions. So another area what is very important and where there's a lot of action going on is behavioral modification. According to a paper in Mayo Clinic Proceedings of April 2016, less than 3% of the Americans live a healthy lifestyle. And I think that's very much similar in the rest of the Western lifestyle. Obviously, health coaches would be a very good thing, but not everybody can afford their personal health coach. And so companies came up with, virtual health coaches. And some of the companies that are working in this area are, for example, MedRespond. These companies do is really provide education to people about how they we can live a better. These programs, technologies come in very handy is in, yeah, and I just wanted to show that Britain's Babylon Health has just launched also in New York to help with relieving the the healthcare system in light of that has just started, that was announced May 5th of 2020. But what I wanted to mention is as well is adherence. Note that adherence is really problematic clinical trials, but also just on the market, patients not taking their prescriptions or not in the way they should. And you see some of the statistics here. So 20% of the hospitalization here, more than 100 billion in healthcare costs, all as a result of people not adhering to their medications. Plenty of reasons for non-adherence, and several companies now have jumped on the bandwagon to really see whether they can improve this fact. And here you see some of these companies involved in this process. Next IT with Teva to develop Claire, and they drove adherence among other things in a large MS patient population. AI Cure worked together with AbbVie. They showed that in a schizophrenia study they could increase adherence from 61% to 89%. Wysa is a UK company that was focusing or is focusing on building mental resilience, especially in younger people. And he wants basically increased adherence and showed a 45% reduction in depression. On May 20th, 2020, Aetna International partnered with Wysa to address the mental health well-being also as a result of the COVID-19 crisis. I know that's not related to adherence, but it shows that companies like Wysa that are also very big in the adherence market are really doing well, and they really find also the partners to work with to really improve adherence on a global scale. The last one I want to mention is MediSafe, and of course I mentioned only 4 here, but there are many more companies that are working in this field. Hypertension and diabetes, 70% of the non-adherent patients became adherent after using their platform. And that's a huge improvement. If you think of clinical trials, and so this is not something only a financial burden on the system that people are not adhering to the medication. Data mining use by recognizing text. You see now that artificial intelligence is also being added to the electronic healthcare records. And so you can do much more with your electronic health records. You can look at population health, you can use telemedicine, voice interaction, you can use it for clinical decision making. You can predict you could not do before that are now becoming possible because of the integration of artificial intelligence in that are involved in this field are Javion, making a business in predicting events so that they are ahead of the curve when it comes to prescribing medications and therapies, really to save lives and make patients quicker. Lumiata, similar, identifying and managing risks, but then more at the individual level. Flatiron Health, cancer care, on May 22nd, announced that a novel lung cancer clinical trial. So that these companies are very active and really, at the top of the market. Welltalk, for example, also on June 12th, further expanded their ecosystem with 7 new Connect partners. remed diabetes, closed loop insulin for the management of chronic. And last one, Zephyrin Health, that is really helping to engage the right positions, accounts, and institutions. I said earlier about my friend Karen Lee Sobel, finding the right physicians. That's really something that Zephyr Health, for example, can help with. Clinical trial management. GNS Healthcare is an example of that. So they make it a business to answer questions like, well, how will, what result would be different if you use one intervention over the other? Being used by Amgen and Genentech, for example. Trials AI design clinical trials, and in that way also shortens the clinical trial times, makes it more efficient. Bioclinica, very similar. And the last one I mentioned here is Unlearn Genesis, and that uses the data of many thousands of patients to really build disease-specific machine learning models that can then help to create digital twins, basically a copy of a real patient that is then becoming part of the virtual medical records. And these medical records can then be used to, to help to design clinical trials, to make predictions, and a whole lot of other things. Again, I mentioned 4 here, but there's a lot of other companies working in this field. Then recruitment for clinical trials. And I must say also that in this field, some areas where companies are working in more than 1 or 2 fields. But for recruitment of clinical trials, for example, you can think of Quantum Black. Quantum Black is working together with Novartis, and they show that they were able clinical trial enrollment 50%. Something similar, and they had a very good example where they helped the Mayo Clinic in a breast cancer clinical trial. Deep 6 AI, their slogan is Deep 6 AI applies artificial intelligence to medical records to find more better matching patients for clinical trials in minutes rather than months. Faster than what was used to, that they are successful also show that I think it was late last year, November or so, that they brought in $17 million to expand their platform. So many of these companies are doing very well, and again, at the top of the market. One of the last things I want to mention in this respect, remote monitoring of patients. I'm not going to mention all these companies, but you see that also this is really a booming business, and there's a lot going on. All companies from really big to very small always mean to be the best. You see that some of the smaller companies in this area do very well, and I think that's also very, a signature almost of the digital world. The development can go very, very fast, and I think that's also something that a couple of years ago, in a couple of months, you can have something that goes from an idea stage to a market stage. It might be a B version, which you never would do, of course, when you're talking about a drug. But with a digital product, you can go to market fairly easily, fairly fast, and then you can improve on that same product. And so within a time span of a year, you can see an enormous development in these kind of technologies. Some of the things they are measuring: blood pressure, heart rate, blood oxygen, respiration rate, movement, steps, glucose, body temperature. But there are many other things, almost like having an IC unit on your body that keeps track of you 24/7. Then artificial intelligence affect the pharma value chain. So you're a little bit of an idea of the areas where implemented. And I could probably talk a whole day about this because each section would deserve probably at least an hour to discuss and to talk about. But to keep the focus on clinical trials, what we see really in the clinical trial phase happening is that things like study design, patient matching, stratification, enrollment, monitoring, adherence, those kind of things are really being influenced and being changed dramatically by the introduction of artificial intelligence. And I'm just taking a look here at the time. And I see I have another 5 minutes, so nicely on track. Of the challenges. So challenges using of AI in pharma, I will make this quick because you're all aware of this. By the way, that's not me hanging there. But some nice represent challenges. And some of these challenges are you need the right data science team. Very obvious, but you would be surprised to see how many companies are really struggling with this to get a multifunctional, cross-functional team in place that is also really connected and able to talk with each other. It is not. Then you have, of course, the problem with the data. The data is coming from a variety of sources. It's not like many different kinds of food that you can easily mix together and make a nice meal. If you get data from a lot of different sources, it can become quite a mess. And so you need to streamline that, you need to clean it up, and that's also their data is not clean. Related to this, you need to make sure that the artificial intelligence tools that you're using can handle the data and can do something with it. Then obviously there is a lot of hype, skepticism. I think that is partly disappearing, especially now with COVID-19. There's a big push for using these kind of technologies, and you see that more and more people are embracing the new developments. But still, unfortunately, there have been made claims and predictions that did not come out, and that, of course, puts the field in a negative light. Privacy, security, that could be a discussion for a whole day. I'm not going there, but everybody knows that that's really a big issue. And then you can also think of the privacy and security legislation that's very different in different geographical areas around the world. And so that's also something that you need to take into account. Validation, regulatory, another very big challenge, because if you only look, for example, at the healthcare apps, and this was an estimate in 2017, there were already like 220,000 healthcare apps. And it's impossible for any regulatory agency to keep track of and how they are going to solve that. I mean, the FDA and other regulatory agencies are working on this very hard and doing what they can with the means they have, but it keeps a challenge. So that's something we need to keep in mind when we are working in that field, also to take our own responsibility, our own ethical guidelines, and make sure that they are in line with what's being expected by the public. Bias, another very important thing. The artificial intelligence algorithms are made by people. People have biases, and so these biases also can work themselves into the artificial intelligence tools that we use. And that's, again, a very important thing that we need to, as objectively as possible, need to analyze. First, there's the wrong conclusion. So I always tell this relationship between eating ice cream and being eaten by shark. If you would put all the data together, you might think there is a relation. Obviously, there is not. For sharks and ice cream, that's quite easy to figure out. It might not be that easy if you have millions and millions of data points and you find a very, very interesting conclusion. To verify that is sometimes not so easy, but you need to make sure to verify it to make absolutely sure that you're not concluding something that is basically something that was in the data but not related. Thing beyond the horizon, very quick. We will obviously create a lot of data. An estimate is that we will have give you an idea, that is equivalent to watching the entire Netflix catalog about 500 million times, or about 40 trillion DVDs that reach the moon back and forth over 100 million times. That's a lot of data. And so what are we going to do with that? That's not absolutely sure yet what we are going to do with that, but it's something that people are working on, thinking about, and artificial intelligence obviously will play a huge role. Compose symphonies, to drive cars. We have things like Siri, Alexa. We also have Sophia. I don't know if you've ever seen Sophia, but I can highly recommend to see a YouTube video of Sophia. It's a talking robot with, I think, over 60 facial expressions. And so seeing her talk, and she gave interviews, I think she got even citizenship in Saudi Arabia. But that aside, it's an amazing technology being developed already to such a level. And what I said earlier, that yeah, AI is not robots, and robots can probably not replace people. I think at the moment that's the case, but I wouldn't be so sure 10 years from now. We'll see. Another thing that is around the corner, well, maybe not around the corner, but that is being developed, is quantum computing, solving problems in minutes, not millennia. And yeah, 15, Google claimed that their quantum computer was able to do things about 100 million times faster than the general laptop. And I forgot exactly the calculation, but it means that in 1 week or so, you can do the same work as your laptop could do in 200,000 years. That's a huge, huge amount of calculation power. And when we get that for the pharma industry, it would mean that we could do simulations and models that we have never been able to do before. We could do predictions in clinical trials, virtual clinical trials, without any patients involved. And they might give us better data and better results than the clinical trials that we are using and running today. With that, I would like to end my presentation. I want to show you the last thing. The UK government last year unlocked 153 million for quantum computing, to show you that it's not just some of the future Bill Gates and such, but it's really something that is being pushed also by governments throughout the world. And with that, I come to the end of my presentation, and I would love to answer some of your questions. And thank you so much for listening.
Thank you, Ronald. Thank you very much for your presentation. We do have a couple of questions. The first one is, who is ultimately responsible if an AI algorithm gets the diagnosis wrong? Is it the company that developed the AI or the physician that followed it?
That's a very interesting question, and I'm not a legal person, but I know one example where there was a healthcare app on the phone that used AI to predict whether people had skin cancer or not. And that company, I think, was eventually sued by people that had been misdiagnosed, false negatives. And so the people got to hear that they did not have skin cancer, but they had skin cancer. And I don't know the fate of those patients, but obviously that is a very, very dangerous development. That was something that happened a couple of years ago. I do not know where that stands right now, but it's a very murky area, and it's really difficult. I think ultimately the responsibility are with the company that developed these kind of technologies.
Okay, thank you. We don't have any other questions, but I have one for you, and that is, do you have any thoughts on companies like HealX out of the UK or Recursion Pharmaceuticals out of the US? Any thoughts on those companies?
Yeah, they are more, so Recursion, I know, and I know they are more related to drug development.
Right, that's right.
There's also, and you have many, I don't want to only mention them, but you also have like Atomwise, you have Cloud Pharmaceuticals, you have In Silico Medicine, you have Excentia, also in the UK. And there's probably, I would say, a dozen companies that are really setting the scene, really, yeah, cutting edge, leading the field. I think some results will come out of that, and some results already have come out of that, but not really the results I think that everybody is kind of waiting for. So we have seen some breakthroughs, but nothing really that, yeah, were as spectacular as what we have had hoped for. I think that might happen in the future. I also know that some of these companies, for example, are now in the arena for producing or developing COVID-19 medication. And yeah, let's wait and see. I'm hopeful that some of these companies will succeed planning to do, but it's not easy. And yeah, I think it will happen, but it will take some time.
Okay, very good. Ronald, we're all set for time now, so thank you very much for your presentation. We appreciate you sharing your knowledge on artificial intelligence. Thank you very much.
Thank you again for the opportunity.